Hey, Margie here. If you're ready to learn some simple steps that you and your family can put into your lives that will make a difference for your bones and your overall health, as well as your happiness, then you are in the right place because I'm so excited about our special guest today, Katie Wells. And Katie is the founder and CEO of wellnessmama.com and wellness.com. She's also known as the Wellness Mama. She's a mom of 6 with a background in journalism, and she took her health into her own hands and started researching to find answers to her health struggles. Her research turned into a blog and podcast, and she has now written over 1,500 blog posts, 3 books, and was named one of the 100 most influential people in health and wellness. And in this episode, she shares such fabulous tips that are truly easy to put into your life that will help you, children, grandchildren. It's just full of fabulous takeaways. So stay tuned. Welcome, Katie. I am so happy to have you on this podcast. You exemplify so many amazing things that we're going to talk about, and you have just so much wisdom to share that I'm just honored to have you here. So thanks for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an honor, and I'm very excited to get to chat with you again.
Okay, so before we get started, so people can truly appreciate what you're going to talk about, we absolutely have to go into the backstory because you've been doing this for such a long time. And, I just have to say, if I had to name a few people who've taken things into their own hands and not accepted the status quo and not accepted, oh, that's just the way it is, I'm telling you, you would be one of them. And by what you've done, you've impacted, probably millions around the world. And Wellness Mama is a name so many people have grown up with and they've, followed you. And anyway, so why don't we start back from the beginning, because you were not a medical person, you were nothing like that. And just share a little bit about I know your story could take a long time, but a little bit so people understand where you're coming from.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll do the short version. And I like that you mentioned I'm not a medical doctor. I don't blame it on the internet, but I am a mom of 6. And I do think that women and moms especially are an absolute force of nature and have the ability to shift society and the health of their own families in ways that doctors can't to the same degree. And I also don't say anything negative about doctors. I think the best partnerships happen when we have well-researched individuals working with well-researched practitioners to achieve really good outcomes. So I think there's a beautiful synergy there. But for me, the story involves somewhat not being able to find answers for a really long time. And there's sort of a dual purpose story that is how I originally got into this world. I thought I was going to go into journalism and pre-law and politics, and I hope to change society that way. And 2 things happened somewhat simultaneously. The first one was that while pregnant with my first son, I started having some weird health symptoms. And then after I had him, they seemed to intensify, and I wasn't able to get answers from doctors. I would be told things that perhaps a lot of women have heard from doctors, that either it's all in my head, or this is just part of being a woman, or this happens postpartum, or I love that line, your labs are normal. And so I got those kinds of answers from doctors. And around that time, I also read an article, I believe it was in Time magazine, that was talking about a recent study that said that for the first time in 2 centuries, the current generation of American children would have a shorter life expectancy than their parents. And just reading through what they anticipated and were now seeing in the rise of all these chronic illnesses and the rise of health problems, especially in children, and wondering, why is this happening and why is it happening so quickly? Anytime we see that change where our children are going to live shorter lives than we are, to me, it begs the question, why? Like, what are the factors that are contributing to that change when we live in a time where they would say, modern medicine has come so far, we have all of these advances, why is that statistic changing? And so at that point, I turned my journalism background into researching the world of health and wellness to find out for myself what's going on that I'm not getting good answers to. And why are we seeing this kind of society-wide in all age groups? Because that's a really striking thing when we see that shift. And slowly, I learned how to start asking better questions and hopefully getting better answers, both for my own health and for societally, why we were seeing that. And throughout that journey, learned again, slowly, that at the end of the day, we are each our own primary healthcare provider, and that while I could work with practitioners to hopefully get answers, the responsibility lied entirely with me. And it was when I was able to learn to step into the driver's seat for my health, for myself and for my family, that things really started to shift. And it was certainly a long journey. But part of my mission with Wellness Mama is I think anytime I can help someone else have a shorter learning curve than I had on that, or even better, help moms know this so that our kids maybe don't have to face these problems at all, or certainly don't have to try to figure it out in their 30s like I did. That's what really drives me and the mission of Wellness Mama, because I think, like I said, moms are such a force of nature. And if we can help the moms, we change the families, we change society.
I couldn't agree more. I always tell everybody knowledge is power, and you have to dig deep and never accept, that's just the way it is. I'm sorry. And you've done that. Well, why don't you share what's happened with Wellness Mama? Because it's just something you have to be so proud of, because it's not a little movement. So, it wasn't like you just decided, oh, I'll just start this. I mean, I guess that's what you did, but why don't you share what happened? Because it just says when you go with an idea and you want to make a difference in the world, and you work hard. I mean, I think the key is also taking action. A lot of us can say, oh, yeah, I want to change this. I want to change that. But we don't do anything, sort of like a car sitting in the driveway. But you were a person who took action. You didn't know everything. As you said, you weren't a medical person. So why don't you just share a little bit? Because I just think, as I said, it's inspiring. You've always been inspiring to me. But I think for everybody listening, I just think you have such a beautiful message in what you did.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And I'm deeply grateful every day that I get to be part of this community of moms and to speak to moms, because, like I said, I think they're the ones that will really drive the change. And I think we're seeing that play out with moms making decisions for their own health. And 15 years ago, or a little over that now, when I started, I feel like a lot of the things that thankfully are much more mainstream knowledge now were not really being talked about. And I mean, I even look back and think of the times I was buying just organic food through co-ops or buying grass-fed meat out of the back of an Amish farmer's little buggy. Like, it was the kind of the Wild West back then. And so part of it, I was just documenting my journey and these things that I was discovering that it felt like at the time nobody was really talking about, but that seemed like could make a tremendous impact for people. And as I started writing, I discovered there was a whole community of moms who were having similar experiences, whether it was their own health struggles or kids with health struggles, or just simply wanting to move to a more natural lifestyle for their kids. And I realized the power of community. I think that's one of the things we've lost to some degree in the modern world. We're connected, but we don't have the same community that we used to have. And so I wanted to also nurture a place of community where moms could learn from each other, not just from me, but from each other, because I think our collective wisdom is so powerful. And I think that's something past generations maybe understood and nurtured a lot better than we do in today's world, and how wisdom was passed on through generations. And so I just wanted to create a place of community where that could happen, along with practical resources, because I also realized moms are often the busiest and most overwhelmed. And if they could find things that would be practical and easy to implement and actionable, that might help them have a little more bandwidth, might help their health improve, or whatever it may be. So I tried to start writing in a way that I could answer whatever question moms were looking for and only answer that question in a blog post. So it wouldn't be 90 things you can do to improve your health. It would be the answer to a singular question, whether it be related to magnesium or sunlight or whatever it might be. And then to see that community grow, I feel like far beyond me, has been such a blessing, because I think like these moms are the real change makers, and it's just been an absolute awe and joy to watch.
I think the other interesting thing is, you started with young children. As you said, you have 6 children. So you were living this, and this has been many years. So now you've seen what happens, because a lot of the people listening to this podcast are truly all ages. There are people with osteoporosis who have grandchildren. And they've learned so much about their bones, and we know it can start young. And I was so excited I was able to be on your podcast sharing important things that moms can do and everybody can do for all ages, so we can actually change the trajectory of osteoporosis at an early age. But, they've learned things, how to take care of their bones and how to eat healthy, and different things that they see are not being, maybe their children or grandchildren are not doing. And I think it's an opportunity for everybody, because there's all ages listening, but I think it's an opportunity that you can, some of the lessons you've learned, that when people learn that, when they pass it down. So why don't you just share what you've seen? Because, you've been doing this over 15 years, I guess, right? And so you've seen when you work with children younger. I mean, my kids are old now, they're in their 30s. So I don't have that opportunity. And I didn't become a health coach until 2011. They were already, even though I was always somewhat healthy, but I didn't know what I know now. But when people learn, what have you seen with these children? I guess my question to you is, what have you seen with the children, the moms who started early and now it's been many years? What changes have you seen?
Yeah, it's been beautiful to watch. And I will say, like, on the personal level, the rest of my story was that I was eventually diagnosed with Hashimoto's, which I think diagnoses and symptoms are their own interesting thing to analyze and ask better questions about. But I would say I was given the word Hashimoto's to explain my symptoms. And over time, realized symptoms are an incredible gift. And it was my body giving me clear messages. And in working with my body over a span of a few years, I was able to reverse the Hashimoto's so that I no longer have that word associated with my health. And I don't take medication. I have now fully resolved that. And one of the beautiful things I learned in that, and what I've seen play out with these moms who have been in this world and on this journey for a while, is the body is, I believe, infinitely capable of healing. And it's wired to want to move to a state of optimal health at all times. And if it isn't for some reason, that's a beautiful chance to ask better questions to figure out, what is my body trying to tell me? What does it either have that it doesn't need or need that it doesn't have? And how can I work with my body to move to the state it already wants to be in, which is thriving and optimal health? And the beauty of this is when we're working with kids, they tend to respond super rapidly because they're in that amazing growth phase and their bodies are so adaptable. And so when we implement these changes, and especially when I see families do it, the kids often respond really rapidly, but then we see the parents as well. And I think it illustrates the beauty of the fact that the body is capable of healing at any age. And so it's just learning to support our body, have a relationship with our body and support it in the way it's asking for. But I love to see that when we're working with the kids, especially, they respond so quickly, but that doesn't mean that we as adults can't. Like, the data comes out all the time these days showing that, they once thought we couldn't create new brain cells as adults, and now they know we can, or we can't regenerate our bones, and now they know we can, that the body can regenerate. And so I think as more information comes out about this and we see people actually doing this in their own lives, I'm really excited to see those shifts start to happen. But I think the message of it, especially with families, is that hope, because seeing the kids respond so quickly shows us an insight into all bodies are capable of that, no matter what our age is. And I think that's so encouraging.
Yeah. And I love the idea, to me, I work more with older people than kids, but that whatever we do, the younger, you're never too old and you're never too young to start, taking action steps. And I also really thought what you said was so important about one thing at a time so that we can slowly make change that's sustainable versus overwhelm. That's so very important. And I like what you said in your blog post, one thing, and then celebrate it, and then you move on. I had the same thing with Hashimoto's. When I went back to school for health coaching, I started changing some of my habits, and I had a Hashimoto's, and I was on Synthroid, I was on medication. And when I made these, which seemed like not such big deals, but changes to my diet, a few changes, guess what? I've been off now since 2011, all medication, and it's really wonderful. Hey, Margie here. Posture is so important for our bones, overall health, and happiness. And unfortunately, it's something that's often overlooked. As a physical therapist for over 40 years, I've seen that when people do certain daily posture exercises, it's a game changer. So I created 7 short videos that demonstrate the exercises I have found most effective. And you can access these free videos by going to tiny URL, so tinyurl.com/mybetterposture, or just click the link in the show notes. And then you can start incorporating these easy exercises into your life, and before you know it, you'll start seeing improvements in your posture. So now let's get back to the show. So let's really talk about what moves the needle, because what have you found that you've shared that's really made a difference for families and just, everybody listening?
Yeah. Well, the great news here is that it's often the things that are not super expensive, not super complicated. It's the daily consistent habits that matter most. And I love what you said about never being too old or never being too young, because in the mom world, I feel like sometimes there's a temptation to dismiss how much our kids are capable of understanding and how they can make great choices when they're given the right tools and the understanding and the education to do that. And so I love seeing that play out on the kids side when we teach our kids and we educate them early and explain how food interacts with their body, or light interacts with their body, or the products they put on their skin interact with their body. I find they often surprise us in their ability to make really amazing choices when they're given great information to make those choices. And I think, like you said, the other side of that is that you're never too old. The body wants to thrive at every age. And so when we make those choices, no matter the age, the body will respond. And that's awesome. I also, having been through the personal journey of working with so many doctors and researching to try to find my answers, I had phases where I had worked with so many practitioners. I was on all these extreme protocols. I had spreadsheets of supplements that I was tracking. I was doing labs all the time. I was trying every biohack. It had gotten very complicated. And I love that the lesson I learned through all of that is that, yes, those things have their time and their place, and they can be very, very valuable tools. And they work better or at all if you have the foundational things in place first. And the great news about that is these are the things that are either inexpensive or free that you can integrate as habits into daily life. And that when you build that foundation, everything else works better. And so I feel like I've shifted over the years from the complexity of methylation and genetics. Again, I think those things are important, but I don't think we need to get super nuanced in our genes and supporting them with elaborate supplement routines until we get those foundational things figured out. And often the foundational things will remove the need for the more complicated things if we really get them right. And so to me, I put this kind of in a category of pillars. One being light, which can become, it could be a series of podcasts all on its own. The inputs into the body, whether it's nutrition, personal care products, supplements, those I would kind of put all in one category as well. I think human connection and relationships actually deserves a category in the physical health realm because of how important we now know that loneliness is more dangerous than smoking, and that the quality of our relationships, when we look at blue zones, absolutely impacts longevity and health markers over time. And then I think beyond that, then we can get into the more complicated biohacky, nuanced, dialed in perspective. And I feel like in the modern world, it doesn't set us up for success in those, but it's easy to adapt our modern lifestyles to have success in those areas. I also think that often the most impactful things are overlooked because of their simplicity. But there's a tremendous amount of data, for instance, showing that if as soon as possible after waking up, you go outside, ideally touch the ground or a tree or a plant, but just go outside, get natural light on your eyeballs without glasses or contacts, without a window in between you and the outside. First of all, that morning sunrise light is really powerful broad spectrum red light. And I know people spend lots of money on red lights and make that part of the routine, and you can do that, and that's great. And you can also get it for free at the sunrise and the sunset. That's all those same spectrums of light, and it's free, and we all have access to it. And just that one change, if somebody didn't change anything else, that one change could start to shift their cortisol patterns and adrenaline patterns. It could start to shift their circadian rhythm and the time at which their body starts creating melatonin, which is important for deep sleep. And I know you've talked about this. Deep sleep is that repair time of the body, which is impactful for the bones, but also the liver. That's when our cerebral spinal fluid flushes and we're able to clean the brain, which they think now might help avoid problems like Alzheimer's and dementia when we let the brain self-clean. Like the body has mechanisms for all these things. And we can begin that process by something as simple as just going outside for 10 minutes in the morning as soon as possible after waking up. So I say, if possible, get sunlight before screens, get hydration before caffeine, ideally get protein before caffeine. If we can just shift our mindset into a fuel and nourish mentality, like that will often point us in the direction of all of these things. And with light being such an important pillar, I know you've talked about the vitamin D side and vitamin D being synergistic with things like magnesium and calcium for bone health, but the sun's benefits go far beyond just vitamin D. That's an important one for sure. But getting midday light also creates a cascade of circadian signaling mechanisms that improves sleep later on because it's helping our body line up with the circadian rhythm of where we live and giving it really important cues that contribute not just to sleep, but to all hormones, because vitamin D is also a pre-hormone. Melatonin is involved in the hormone cycle. Cortisol is involved in the hormone cycle. And so when we get these light cues, our body has an easier ability to self-regulate in those constraints. And then same thing again if we're able to get evening light. Now, the part that the modern lifestyle makes difficult is it's easy to be on artificial light like screens at night or to have bright lights in our home. For most of human history, that hasn't been an option, and it is for us now. So it sometimes involves a little bit of intentionality about artificial light exposure at night. And I find this fascinating because the research now is saying that exposure to artificial bright light at night can have a really negative effect on things like our blood sugar, on, of course, our sleep rhythms, but that it can be as damaging as eating something like a processed high sugar diet late at night, just getting that blue light. And so if we can make an effort to avoid the bright lights at night, what I do in my house is just to have lamps that have amber bulbs or red bulbs. And after sunset, I switch from overhead lighting, which the body recognizes as like sunlight, bright light. That's a signal like, oh, it's daytime. So the overhead lights go away at sunset. the lamps go on, which are red light. And in nature, we would only ever see red light from eye level or below, because that would be the sunset. That would be a fire. That would be redder light, lower level. And just those little shifts, people will often be shocked how much of a difference shows up in their labs, in their sleep, in their stress, which are, of course, some big issues and things that a lot of people are paying attention to and looking at. And I think beyond that, the conversation of diet can get very, very nuanced, but it also comes down to nourishing the body as optimally as possible. And there will be, of course, individual genetic variation within that. For me, what helped was shifting away from the topic of things like macros or calories or any of that when it came to food, and instead learning to focus on the positive of, if I'm going to eat meals every day, how can I make sure they are maximally nourishing within what my body's asking for? And so instead of calories, which can look at like more of deprivation mindset, I was looking at like maximal nourishment per volume of food or per whatever I was going to eat. And that, of course, brings in the whole concept of micronutrients and all of the things our body needs for all of its enzymatic reactions, and things like protein, which we need to maintain muscle mass and avoid things like sarcopenia as we age. And that's going to be a little different for everybody, but I think your body will give you the cues if you're paying attention. And to me, light helps you start to pay attention to what your body's asking for. Same thing with having, but I'll let you jump in there. I know that was a long answer.
I was just going to say with the light, I couldn't agree more. And people sort of poo-poo this and don't realize the major impact. I know personally for me, I was doing a later night show. I was doing something on the computer, and all of a sudden, two things happened. I realized after I did that at night and I was on the screen, I wasn't sleeping. But then I also realized that we got a new television set. And my whole sleep was shot. When your sleep is shot, your whole life, everything, as you said, your blood sugar, everything starts shot. I'm like, what's going on? I didn't really change anything. And then it hit me. The new TV had more pixels and all sorts of things. And that's what it was. So even though I do like to watch TV, like for an hour in the evening, it's a chill time, I wear the glasses now. I just wear the amber glasses, but that changed everything. And I've seen this with people in my community. Don't minimize what you said about light is so important. And I just love that. And the morning routine also, the other day, I thought my neighbor must have thought I was crazy. I was barefoot. I was outside getting the light, and I was also doing some qigong, and I didn't realize he was standing there watching me. But regardless, it does change everything. Is there anything else just before you go on, when you do your morning, when you're outside with the light, is there anything else you recommend, or you say to yourself, do you add any little practices into that also help?
Yeah, good question. So one habit I did is I started putting a quart of water, and I usually add salt to it because I find we actually are not often getting enough sodium and chloride, which is indicated for digestion, for electrical communication in the body, and a lot of other things. So I put that on my nightstand. So it's the first thing I see when I wake up. And I'll take that outside with me. I usually will do some kind of movement, whether it's gentle walking, or I think Qigong is awesome. That's amazing. But just that little anchoring time outside and hydrating before starting the day. And like you said, I think people underestimate how powerful this is, but I call this the light switch in the body because it does so much so profoundly. They actually did a study called the camping study, and I may not remember the exact percentages offhand, but basically people were outside without any artificial light for a period of a few days, or I believe up to a week. And many circadian related problems, insomnia, all those things started to resolve within the span of 1 week. And bedtime shifted naturally. They were waking up earlier with the sun, energized, and hormone levels drastically changed. Not just sleep-related hormones, but sex hormones and all the other hormones within the span of just a week started to shift. And so I believe this is a really, really powerful cue. And we also now know, I think a lot of us assume that our energy comes from our food, and some of it does, but it's less than you would think. I think most people would, if they had to guess, assume like maybe 95% or up of our energy comes from the inputs of our food. But actually, light is a substantial trigger to energy production in the body, including things like mitochondrial activity. And so when I talk about what I call the light switch, this is one of those switches that you turn on by really optimizing your daily light rhythms and your patterns. And you may actually find you get more energy from getting your light cues right than you even do from your diet. Not that diet isn't also very important, but I just feel like light is so underestimated. So that's why I put that one ahead of even nutrition as far as inputs the body needs. We were meant to live in nature, and we now, as modern humans, have the ability not to. but you'll often see tremendous benefits from just finding ways to sync up your routine to the natural rhythms of nature. And the body knows what to do when it's given those correct cues.
Yeah, I just love that. And it's free and it's something that's doable. You can, you can go. And what about people who live where there's absolutely no sunlight? Do you have any recommendations?
That makes it tougher for sure. Years ago, I visited Finland in the winter when there was only about 2 hours of light-ish. It wasn't even full daylight. It was like the sun would start rising and then it would start setting. And I noticed even within a week that my mood changed. And I was like, maybe this is what people who have depression feel like. Like, this is actually hard. It feels like it's hard to do things because light is such an important cue. Thankfully, there are things like this is where technology can be our friend. Things like natural mimicking light boxes that are a high enough level of lux that the body can get the same cues. I still always prefer the sun and recommend the sun if it's available. But in areas where the sun truly isn't rising for months at a time, that can be a helpful option. A lot of people also don't realize if it's not that the sun's not rising and you're living in a 2-hour light window, but just that it's a cloudy day or it's kind of gray outside, you still are getting so much more light from being outside than you are from bright lights indoors. And so even if it's a cloudy day, even if it's raining, I still go outside and make sure that my eyes get that input early in the morning. But in the places where it is an extreme difference, somewhere like Finland or equal areas of latitude, that would be a place where you could use technology to your advantage and then still do the other things, like make sure you're getting darkness at night, not having artificial light on at night, but just mimic nature, mimic the ideal of nature whenever possible, even if you aren't living in a place that has that light option every single day.
Yeah, so many people, the minute they can't sleep, they turn to medication and sleep, start with this because this is so powerful and underestimated. It's not what the doctor will tell you. It really is. I mean, maybe a functional medicine doctor, but typically when you go to the doctor and say, I just am not sleeping, you'll end up getting a prescription or something else. You may. So this is just such a good place to start. And I also agree with you that, just this base level, so often people are so worried about the little things like how much vitamin K2 do I need, or how much this, how much that, or my lab showed this. And they're so focused on that start with the basics and everything else gets better, as you said. Okay, so you can continue where you were at.
Yeah, exactly like you said. And I think part of it is I believe the mainstream narrative got a few things, I wouldn't say completely incorrect, but they lost the nuance of what would make them actually helpful. Because for a lot of decades now, we've gotten recommendations to avoid the sun. We've gotten recommendations to lower our salt and mineral intake of certain minerals. And if you look at nature, those things don't line up with what the body actually needs. And so I feel like, again, things like putting salt in your water, the body is an electrical being and it communicates electrically. And minerals are required for that process. I know you talk a lot about minerals as well, but I feel like the recommendation to avoid salt entirely has potentially done more harm than good for a lot of people because we need those things for electrical communication within the body, as well as things like digestion and assimilation of food, because salt is sodium chloride. The chloride part of that is what's used in making things like hydrochloric acid in the stomach to properly break down our food and get the minerals we need out of them. And so I think like that recommendation has potentially done us a disservice by not fully understanding the equation and all of the components that come into it. I feel like in that realm, we sort of blamed blamed salt for what sugar did. And in the light thing and avoiding the sun, I know people do that out of a desire to avoid skin cancer, but it's really interesting when you look at the data on that. Getting proper vitamin D levels and getting proper light signaling actually has a reductive effect on a lot of other types of cancers. And I would also preface that perhaps the skin cancer equation is not strictly related to the sun anyway, because we as a population use a lot more sunscreen than we used to. We are indoors a lot more than we used to. And melanoma is still on the rise and often occurs in areas that don't see the sun. So I think that's an area that it deserves some deeper questioning to hopefully get some better answers. But when you look at the data and adjust for all-cause mortality and all of these other factors, light inherently does improve longevity. It does improve all these things we're talking about. So I think the blanket recommendation to avoid the sun has also been potentially really harmful for a long time.
Well, I was just going to ask you, so what do you tell the kids and the parents? What's your suggestion in terms of going out in the sun and sunscreen? What do you recommend?
Yeah, so this might be like a tad bit controversial, and I've had everything from dermatologists to oncologists and across the board on my podcast before and gotten varying answers to this question. even the more holistically minded dermatologist I've had on recently say, there can be value to not getting too much sun, especially on your face, especially if you're worried about aging. And I know that's something that a lot of us think about as well. So I personally wear a hat if I'm going to be out in bright sun just to shield my face. But I actually make an effort to get bright sunlight on the rest of my body as much as possible. And I think within range. Sunburn, of course, not beneficial. We don't want to make a goal to get sunburned. But there's apps like D-Miner that let you know what the UV is in your area in a certain day. And then based on factors like your skin tone, you can figure out how long do I need to be in the sun to get the right amount of vitamin D, to get the right amount of light input, because it will be a little different for each of us. But I actually find I'm making an effort to get more sunshine as much as possible and to encourage my kids to play outside barefoot in clothes that allow the sun to get to their skin as much as possible because those light cues are so powerful.
Okay, so now we've talked about the light, but you made a really good point about, here we're lathering ourselves, we're talking about skin cancer and different things, melanoma being higher, but yet we're lathering ourselves sometimes with lotion that has all sorts of chemicals in this. So you want to just talk about the story, because besides everything else that Katie did, everybody who's listening, besides changing the lives for moms and teaching moms how to eat healthy and their children to eat healthy and how to do your own products and everything else that you've done, which, as I said, you'll have to listen to Katie's podcast or it's unbelievable what you've done. Besides all that, and besides raising 6 children, which is not a minor feat, you also have created a whole line of wellness products. So what provoked you to do that? And, what have you seen? What were you seeing that made you create your own line?
Thank you. Yeah, for me, like I said early when I started, a lot of these products didn't exist. You couldn't buy them if you wanted to. So I, in the beginning, ended up just making most things from scratch, everything from lotion to laundry detergent. Even I was making my own makeup at one point. And you also brought this up in the context of sunscreen, which I think is an important point I just wanted to touch on briefly, because I actually learned about the dangers of most sunscreens through being a scuba diver. I didn't actually get an intro into that in the health world. And it's because even the small amounts that people are putting on their skin and then going into the ocean are having an effect on ocean life and on reefs. And we're seeing animals have fertility problems, potentially in part because of, plastic in the ocean as well, but these sunscreen chemicals and them actually having a negative impact on our reefs and the life within the ocean, which is responsible for a lot of oxygen production on our planet. So this is a pretty substantially big issue to pay attention to. And so that's when I started researching safer sunscreens. And there are options like mineral-based sunscreens that people can use if they are sensitive skinned or don't need as much sunlight. I personally still prefer to use like rash guards or hats or cover up or get in the shade versus applying anything to the skin, but there are safer options out there. But to your point, in the personal care world, this is a whole nother category because hopefully people are aware the skin is often called our largest organ. I would argue that muscle could be arguably considered an organ system that's bigger than the skin, but they're both very important. And what we put on our skin, a substantial percentage of that is able to be absorbed into our body. And when we look at data, like now most babies are born with hundreds of chemicals in their cord blood. And we know that the placenta is actually meant to prevent a lot of negative inputs from going through to the baby. And we're still seeing that many chemicals in our babies on the day that they're born. It really begs the question of what are all these things that we're exposed to and how can we minimize that? Because again, these are things that didn't exist, that we didn't interact with as humans for most of our human history, that now we are encountering on a really large scale most days. And it also proportionately affects women more, in part because women on average tend to use more personal care products and just simply put more things on their skin than men do. And so that was what originally led to me making my own products and then eventually creating them at scale for other families, because I realized even though I have recipes for all these things on the site, including the toothpaste that I used for 10 years and made myself, moms are extremely busy and most of us don't have the time or bandwidth to make every single thing we use in our house from scratch. And I had personal friends and even family members who, despite eating organic food and choosing a lot of these more non-toxic things, they were still using certain products that were conventional because they worked better. And I realized that while most of us are wanting to make healthy choices, that we don't want to sacrifice how we look or feel often for those healthy choices. And so women especially were still choosing the more conventional toothpaste that made their teeth whiter or the more conventional shampoos and conditioners that made their hair feel the way they wanted it to over the natural ones. And so I realized if women were going to make that switch, there had to be options that performed as well or better than the conventional ones. And I looked at, when we're talking about families, I often use the rule of 80-20 in business and also in other areas of life, which is the idea that often 80% of results or inputs come from 20% of the initial inputs. And so in the personal care world, I realized that when we're talking about families, 80% of our exposure to toxins often comes through oral care and hair care. And so if I could create better alternatives in those realms in particular, that it would make that switch easier for families. So that's what led to creating the physical products. But I also always tell people I still have all of those recipes up on my site and I will keep those up. So if you do have the time and bandwidth and want to make them, or if you want to choose other natural products, that's great too. But those are just easy places that you can make a switch and see a big impact because you're kind of using that 80-20 to get some of the big offenders out.
That's what I like. I like simple tweaks. And that's what you can do with these products. People don't realize the serious impact. It's hard when you want to teach your family because sometimes they think, oh, please, But as you said, when there's a product that's as good or better than what they can buy and they're not going to get the negatives, it's such a no-brainer. But you also, what I like about your toothpaste, and I have to say, this is great, Katie. The little travel bag that you created for and I love the toothbrush that comes with it. That when you travel, you have this. Now you can talk about that too. But the thing is that the toothpaste you made the children's flavor. I mean, I'm not one who loves but for children, those are tasty. Those are like delicious, better than they can get even. I don't see other toothpaste with what are the flavors? Strawberry and.
Strawberry, and there's a mint and then a charcoal mint and those are both helpful for whitening.
Yes. And just to make that little switch and to even have that in your house. So if you have children or grandchildren over, don't feel that what you're showing them isn't going to have an impact because just making that change and changing their oral microbiome is so powerful. And so, yeah, each product, the deodorant, because that's hard. There's not a lot of good deodorants out there that are healthy and, that aren't going to have all the chemicals in there. So I just think it's incredible. And you even made one for curly hair. And I actually have curly hair, even though I blew it dry today. But you have, so there's times I use different of your shampoos. There's the curly hair and then there's the not curly hair. So, I mean, I think you've tried to accommodate everybody, which I think is so wonderful. You want to just share what you found when people switch over, when families have switched to these kind of products, because the impact of these toxins can be really devastating.
Absolutely, especially for our kids in the younger ages, because a lot of these conventional personal care products have what we now know are endocrine disrupting chemicals in them. And so they can actually affect our children's hormones that are related to how they're growing and how they go through puberty and at what age. And these are increasingly prevalent in society. So I think for kids especially, it's such an important conversation. And the oral health world is one that I really enjoy as like a passion project researching and I get really nerdy about, but I'll try to keep it concise for today. But that world is absolutely fascinating to me. And I started researching it when at one point I was pregnant and I had 3 small cavities and the dentist found them and we decided not to fill them while I was pregnant because there can be issues with dental work while you're pregnant. So I was going to wait till after the baby was born. And we ended up moving before the baby was born. And so I ended up going to another dentist about a year later and they said, oh, you're good, no cavities. And I was blown away because I'd always heard the idea that cavities certainly can't heal, they don't reverse themselves. So I started really delving into it and discovered the work of people like Dr. Weston A. Price and then modern research that confirmed what he found, which is that the body has a natural remineralization process that happens all the time if everything's working correctly, and that we have an oral microbiome that is connected to our gut microbiome, but that is involved in the process of digestion. It's intricate in that remineralization process. And that often, especially if we're seeing recurring dental issues, it might just be that we're not supporting one of those 2 things in the right way. And there's also kind of 2 competing pathogenic things that can happen. We can have one family of bacteria that are related to things like gingivitis and another like strep mutans that can lead to cavities. You don't often see them at the same time because they're kind of competing opportunistic bacteria. But in an optimal world, our oral microbiome is able to keep both of those in check. Just like our gut microbiome, at all times we might find strep B in there. You might find all kinds of pathogenic bacteria, but if our gut microbiome is able to keep those in the right amounts instead of letting them get out of control, it doesn't become a problem. And so I did this multi-year deep dive into the world of oral microbiome and remineralization and realized like there was more to the story. There were better questions to ask than we had been typically asking. And so when I started making toothpaste, I made one that supported what the body naturally does and hopefully gives it the building blocks it needs for remineralization. And there's, of course, the internal side as well of making sure we're consuming enough fat-soluble vitamins, which I know is also important for our bones, and getting enough nutrients so that our saliva has the minerals for remineralization. But there's the oral microbiome component. So I wanted to make a microbiome-safe toothpaste that also gave hydroxyapatite, which is what the body uses to create tooth enamel and which it can replenish if we have everything working correctly.
Talk about the other thing you have, the peppermint tasting. You went a step beyond that. And I think this is really important because so many people, and don't even realize, are taking their daily mouthwash, which is just destroying their oral microbiome. And now they're finding all sorts of negative health effects because of that. So you even went one step further, though, in creating. You want to talk about what else you created to really enhance the oral microbiome?
Yeah, there's a naturally, basically an herbal-based brushing blend that helps keep the microbiome in check. And to your point, this is something that's come out recently in the data, is the profound negative effect of things like mouthwash on the oral microbiome. And some dentists have even compared it to taking antibiotics for the gut and how dramatic of an effect it can have. And we now are seeing that can even ripple into your nitric oxide production. It can affect a lot more than what you might think from just your mouth. And so again, that to me goes back to using these microbiome-friendly products. And if you do have pathogenic bacteria, supporting the body in getting those levels in the right ranges so that your good oral microbiome bacteria can take back over and keep that homeostasis. And so that's, to your point, I'm so glad you brought that up, avoiding things like the really harsh alcohol-based mouthwash that just sort of blanket kill your oral microbiome, just like antibiotics would blanket destroy gut bacteria, and instead finding products that both support the good microbiome and give the body an ability to fight the negative ones.
It's interesting. I was just at the integrative, I never remember the name of this. It was in New York City, the Integrated Health Symposium, I guess. Anyway, and Dr. Perlmutter gave a phenomenal talk. He was on the brain, and he came out and he really felt that mouthwash is contributing to Alzheimer's. He said, so that'll be a whole nother podcast. But the truth is, it's amazing what, when you destroy the oral microbiome. So I think that's so fascinating and how wonderful that you did this deep dive. Not hard to do. I mean, we're talking toothpaste and some other things and avoiding some of the harsh things that, we were so taught, let's kill the germs. And I think with the whole pandemic and everything, kill germs, kill germs, kill germs. But there's another side to that where we were killing important things that were just very helpful for our bodies. Now, I love that you've incorporated that piece into your products and just into all the information that you spread. Honestly, I love everything you do. We could talk for hours and hours. We're just trying to give people some things they can put into their life right away, which you've given so many already. But are there anything else that you think is important that people, like some easy tweaks that people can make that will help themselves as well as their families?
Absolutely. And briefly, just as follow-up to what you just said as well, I would say don't underestimate how much the oral microbiome ripples into the entire body. Like there have been some researchers looking at the connection between, bacterial imbalance or abscesses in the mouth connecting to cancers other places in the body potentially. But even without anything extreme like that, just like anything that goes on our skin gets into our body, anything that goes in our mouth gets into the body even more rapidly. And we know this in the medical world because often certain medications will be given under the tongue or in the mouth to get into the system faster than if we even injected them or swallowed them. So I always encourage people, don't underestimate that. And this is the same reason people with certain health conditions are told to get antibiotics when they have dental work, because those things are so intricately connected and it can have effects in other places in the body. But as far as other key takeaways, I know an area we didn't go deep on was the area of sleep, but I do also feel like this is an area that will be a little different for each person. But if you can make good habits around it and get that part dialed in, it almost sort of forgives a lot of sins in other areas of health if you're getting amazing sleep. And that can be definitely impacted by the light stuff we did talk about. Same with if you can get rid of all light in your room so you're sleeping in as dark of an environment as possible, letting your body create as much melatonin as possible. Melatonin is really powerfully antioxidant in the body. I think if you dial in sleep, the converse of that is if you don't get great sleep, your blood sugar levels will be affected, your hormone levels will be affected. They say even just a few hours of impaired sleep can lead to people showing up with things like impaired driving as if they had been drinking, or blood sugar levels of a pre-diabetic. So sleep is another huge one. And we didn't go deep on community, but it's just a little brief mention of that one. Like I said, we know that loneliness is more dangerous than smoking. The flip side of that is strong community is actually one of the really big factors for longevity. And I think when we look for and adjust the data, this is actually one of the trends that does show up reliably in the blue zones. I know blue zones are often used to justify various dietary approaches that people take, and there isn't as much consistency on dietary approaches as you would think in blue zones. They are all similar relation to the equator. So I think light is another big, again, back to the light, a big component of blue zones, but so is community. And they're starting to realize maybe it's not just that they're eating a Mediterranean diet or just that they are getting enough movement. It's also that they're doing this with people they love. And there's often much more time spent with people. And we're starting to understand even proximity to people who we care about. There's a nervous system entrainment piece that goes along with that in the co-regulation of nervous system. It reduces stress hormones. It increases oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine and all these things that we seem to struggle with in the modern world. And I think we're all missing it to some degree after the pandemic and after just the modern world making us more connected through technology, but less connected in real life. So I think anytime you can build in to your day, to your week, as much as possible, connection with other humans that you love. And my friend Lauren says humans are nutrients. And I think it's one that a lot of us are deficient in the modern world. So that's another piece I would give is those are really big needle movers. They seem simple. They're completely free. And if you can focus on those, you might be shocked how big of a difference you see.
Wow, Katie, I just love those. And I couldn't agree more about community, about every single thing you said, really. But, people underestimate the value of community and prioritize those people in your life. And if you don't have one, find one. And everything you said is so powerful. And as I mentioned before, I'm just so grateful that you are here to share this with us, and so grateful. I have to just tell you the big impact. One person, wanting to make some differences and wanting to change the status quo, what you've done. I just think you're so inspiring, and I'm just glad that you were able to share all this with everyone. Now tell us, so how can people get the products? I know we'll have the link, and you want to share anything about that and the best way to follow you. So why don't you tell us all?
So the products are all at wellness.com, which is just wellness with an E on the end. And then I am just Wellness Mama everywhere on the internet. So wellnessmama.com is the hub where everything lives. The podcast is hosted there and about 1,500 blog posts as well. And then on social media, everywhere, I'm just Wellness Mama as well.
Okay. And I'll have links also for, I guess, the store, right? All the products in the show notes. And is there anything else that you want to share before we end?
I'm just grateful to you for having me on. I love the work that you're doing as well. I so much enjoy getting to interview you on my podcast. So I hope people listen to that one as well, because you are an absolute wealth of knowledge. And it's so inspiring to hear more voices like yours of people who are really making a difference in people's lives and encouraging people. I know before we started recording, we talked about how both of us come from the perspective of trying to focus on the positive and move in the direction of positive changes instead of away from the negative and removing things like fear from our lives. I got interviewed recently. Someone was doing a TikTok video and he asked me, what are the 3 worst things we can put in our body? And I think he expected me to be like glyphosate and sugar or whatever the things were. And I said, fear, guilt, and shame, because if we're in those emotional states, it doesn't matter if we're eating the most perfect food in the world and optimizing everything by the spreadsheet. If we're stressed about it and we're fearful about it, our body's not going to get the full benefit of those things. And so I know it's another one that sounds simplistic and potentially even a little woo maybe to some people, but I think to the degree that we can cultivate things like grace and ease and joy and human connection in our lives and find a way to work through and let go of things like fear and guilt and shame, we're just going to be able to make choices from a much more beautiful and positive place and to nourish our bodies instead of deprive them and to connect with people instead of put up walls. And I think we see just beautiful changes in our lives when we can slowly go on that journey.
Well, you are talking my language. That's to me, the baseline where we need to go first, and then we can do everything else, and we can't minimize that. Oh my gosh, that was just so beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all your wisdom. And as I said, all the work you do. It's just been a pleasure, Katie.
Thank you so much for having me. You're just a joy to chat with, and this has been so much fun.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Katie as much as I did. There were so many takeaways that you can easily put into your life. So just pick 1 or 2 that resonated with you and try them and see how it goes. Katie's giving us some special offers on her products, so make sure to check the links in the show notes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.